A courtroom. A smug cop on the stand, sneering at a black woman in a hoodie, calling her sweetheart as the judge chuckles. He mocks a black teen defendant's tears. Then she stands. The hoodie drops. A DOJ badge flashes. "Your Honor," she says, "I'm a federal prosecutor, and I'm here to prosecute misconduct, starting with him." Ever seen a predator realize they just became prey? This is that moment. The air in Jefferson County Courthouse always tasted of stale coffee and desperation, a metallic tang that clung to the back of Elise Morgan's throat. Today, it was thicker, laced with an arrogance that radiated from the witness stand. She sat in the gallery's worn wooden pews, a borrowed, shapeless gray hoodie pulled low over her brow, obscuring the sharp lines of the tailored suit beneath, a silent protest and a shield. What does it take, she often wondered, for a place of justice to feel like anything other than another cage? Before her, the trial of Marcus Cole, 17, unfolded with the grim predictability she'd come to expect. Charged with resisting arrest and assault on an officer after a traffic stop for a supposed broken taillight had escalated into a brutal takedown. Marcus, a lanky kid with eyes that still held the ghost of childhood, now bore a geography of bruises on his face, a map of an encounter gone terribly wrong. On the stand, Officer Dan Porter preened. Mid-30s, with a bullish neck and the kind of smirk that suggested he'd never been genuinely challenged in his life. He recounted his version of events. His voice, laced with a casual disdain, painted Marcus as a volatile aggressor. "Kid had a chip on his shoulder the size of Cleveland," Porter said, eliciting a low chuckle from the judge, a man whose gavel seemed to fall more heavily on one side of the scales. Elise's fingers tightened around the cool metal of the pen in her hand. It was a simple fountain pen, its silver worn smooth in places, a gift from her father. He'd clutched it while writing his appeals, his manifestos, his letters to her from a cell where he'd ultimately died, a political prisoner in all but name. Each scratch of her nib on the notepad felt like a continuation of his unfinished work. Porter, catching her eye, paused his testimony. "Something amusing you, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice oozing condescension. "This ain't a library, you know. You taking notes for a book club?" A ripple of laughter went through the smattering of police officers supporting their colleague in the back rows. The judge, a portly man named Henderson with a face like a wrinkled bulldog, offered a thin, complicit smile. "Now, Officer Porter, let's stick to the facts. Though I appreciate your observational humor." Elise's jaw clenched. "Sweetheart." The casual diminishment, the assumption of her irrelevance, was a familiar sting. Her knuckles were white around the pen that had written pleas for justice, now recording its perversion. She felt the familiar slow burn ignite in her chest, the one her father had warned her about, the one that could either fuel you or consume you. Marcus's public defender, a young, overwhelmed woman barely out of law school, looked flustered, her objections timid and easily swatted down by Judge Henderson. When the prosecutor asked Porter about Marcus's demeanor after being subdued, Porter leaned into the microphone. "Oh, he was crying like a baby. Big tough guy, blubbering for his mama." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that scraped against Elise's nerves. That was it. The image of Marcus, terrified and weeping, juxtaposed with Porter's callous mockery, snapped something within her. The years of carefully constructed composure, the discipline of working within a system she often despised, fractured. Her father's voice, from a letter yellowed with age, echoed in her mind. "Sometimes, Ellie, you can't just chip at the stone. You have to show them the hammer." Slowly, deliberately, Elise Morgan stood. The gallery stirred, a few curious glances turning her way. The borrowed hoodie, suddenly too warm, too constricting, slid from her shoulders, pooling around her elbows. It revealed the impeccable lines of her dark navy suit and pinned discreetly to her lapel, the glint of gold, the official badge of the United States Department of Justice. A hush fell over the courtroom. Officer Porter's smirk faltered, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly. Judge Henderson, mid-chuckle, froze, his jowls quivering. Elise's voice, when she spoke, was low, clear, and resonant, cutting through the stale air. "Your Honor," she began, her gaze fixed on the judge, then sweeping to lock with Porter's, "Dr. Elise Morgan, Civil Rights Division, Department of Justice." She let the words hang, each syllable imbued with the weight of federal authority. "And I'm not here to observe the decorum or lack thereof. I'm here to prosecute misconduct." Her eyes narrowed, pinning Porter to his seat. Starting with him, the pen in her hand felt less like a recorder of injustice and more like a weapon, finally unsheathed. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by a sharp intake of breath from Marcus Cole's mother in the front row. In that moment, the hoodie lay discarded, but its symbolism had just begun to unfold. The Ghost of Detroit, 2008, still clung to Elise, a scent of old case files and the bitter taste of defeat. She'd been a public defender then, barely 30, burning with a righteous fire that the system seemed determined to extinguish. Her client, Jean-Pierre, a gentle Haitian immigrant with calloused hands and hopeful eyes, had been accused of assaulting a police officer. The cop, a burly veteran named Kowalski with a reputation for aggressive tactics in the immigrant neighborhoods, had a story as neat and tidy as a freshly pressed uniform. Jean-Pierre, who spoke halting English, had a story that was messy, scared, and true. Elise had fought, poring over grainy bodega surveillance footage that showed Kowalski initiating contact, her nights spent translating Jean-Pierre's terrified Creole into coherent legal arguments. But in court, Kowalski's word, backed by his partner and the unspoken Blue Brotherhood, had been granted. Jean-Pierre was convicted, his dreams of opening a small bakery crumbling like dry pastry. Later, Elise would learn Kowalski had a history of similar complaints, all dismissed. Her mentor, retired Judge Ida Lee, a formidable black woman of 72 who had seen the beast of injustice from every angle of the courtroom, had found Elise weeping in her cluttered office. Judge Lee, her eyes holding both the wisdom of ages and a simmering indignation that never quite cooled, had poured her a cup of strong, bitter tea. "They'll break you if you fight fair, child," Ida had said, her voice a low rumble. "The system? It ain't built on fairness. It's built on power. And power doesn't share nicely." The words had been a cold comfort then, a confirmation of a dawning, terrible truth. But the true crucible, the moment that forged Elise's resolve into something harder than steel, came a year later. Her father, David Morgan, a civil rights activist who'd spent 2 decades fighting for voting rights and against police brutality, died in a Pennsylvania state prison. He'd been convicted on trumped-up charges of inciting a riot during a peaceful protest, a sentence so disproportionate it was clearly punitive. His appeals, penned with the very fountain pen Elise now carried, had been systematically denied. His last letter, smuggled out by a sympathetic chaplain, reached her a week after the sterile, official notification of his death. The paper was thin, the handwriting shaky but defiant. "Don't mourn me, Ellie Bean," it read. "They can cage the body but not the spirit. This system isn't broken. It was built this way. Don't try to fix it from the outside with spare parts. Get inside. Learn its machinery. And then, if you can't reform it, burn it down. Burn it all down with the light of truth. Burn it down." The words had seared themselves into her soul. Not with fire and violence, but with the relentless, methodical dismantling he'd always advocated for, yet had been denied the chance to fully achieve. His fight was now hers. She resigned from the public defender's office, the taste of Jean-Pierre's conviction still ashes in her mouth. She applied to the Department of Justice, driven by a cold, clear purpose to wield the system's own power against its corruptions, to dismantle the biases from within. Years passed. The work was grueling, often disheartening. Victories were small, incremental, often invisible to the outside world. The bureaucracy was a suffocating blanket. But the memory of her father, of Jean-Pierre, of countless others, fueled her. Her husband, Carlos Ramirez, a community organizer with a fire that matched her own, though his burned on the streets, in community centers, in the heart of their vibrant Puerto Rican neighborhood in Philadelphia, was her anchor and her conscience. He understood the slow grind of her work but never let her forget the urgency of the fight. "Power bends, Mija," he told her one night, his arms around her as she stared out at the city lights, weary from a case that had gone sideways. "But only if you grab it by the roots. Don't just trim the leaves. Go for the roots." Now, standing in that Ohio courtroom, the echo of Carlos's words, Judge Lee's warning, and her father's final command converged. The roots of Officer Porter's arrogance, of Judge Henderson's complicity, ran deep, nourished by the same poisoned soil that had claimed her father. She had spent years learning the machinery. Perhaps it was time to test its flammability. The courtroom video, shaky and raw, filmed on a smuggled cell phone by Marcus Cole's older sister, hit the internet like a thunderclap. The hashtag prosecutor in a hoodie exploded. Elise, her face stoic as she announced her DOJ credentials, her discarded hoodie a crumpled symbol at her feet, became an overnight icon of resistance. News outlets dissected the clip, commentators debated her actions. Was she a rogue agent, grandstanding? Or a long-overdue force for accountability? For Tarek Johnson, Marcus's 19-year-old cousin, the video was a call to arms. Tarek, an art student with a talent for murals that pulsed with life and a spirit that had already seen too much, led the local chapter of Justice Now. Within hours of the video surfacing, they were organizing. Jefferson County Courthouse found itself surrounded by a sea of faces, black, white, brown, young, old, their voices chanting Marcus's name, demanding Porter's badge. Tarek, megaphone in hand, his voice cracking with emotion but firm with resolve, spoke of his cousin, a gentle soul who dreamed of fixing engines, not fighting cops. Marcus isn't a statistic, he'd roared, he's our blood. And we will not let them bury him in their lies. The unmasking wasn't confined to Officer Porter's public persona. In a quiet suburban house miles away, Lena Porter, a registered nurse known for her gentle hands and soothing presence at the local hospital, felt her world tilt. Dan, her husband, had been different lately. More agitated, defensive. He dismissed the Marcus Cole incident as another punk getting what he deserved. But the video, the look on Elise Morgan's face, the sheer authority in her voice, planted a seed of doubt in Lena's mind. That night, while Dan snored beside her, oblivious, Lena did something she'd never done before. She picked up his phone. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she navigated to his texts. What she found turned her stomach. Exchanges with fellow officers filled with racist vitriol and crude jokes. And then the one that made her gasp, that black bitch in the courtroom thinks she's slick. DOJ Barbie. We'll see how tough she is when this blows over. Just another headline. Another text from a few weeks prior to a number she didn't recognize, hood rats getting brave. Time for another street sweeping. The casual cruelty, the deep-seated hatred was a Dan she didn't know or perhaps had refused to see. The man who kissed their 2 daughters goodnight, who helped old Mrs. Henderson next door with her groceries, was also this. The revelation was a physical blow. Meanwhile, Elise's team at the DOJ, a small, dedicated unit accustomed to swimming against strong currents, dove into Porter's record. What they unearthed was a pattern, carefully obscured but undeniably present. Complaints of excessive force, particularly against Black and Latino men, that had been systematically downplayed or dismissed by internal affairs. Discrepancies in his incident reports, minor at first glance, but cumulatively pointing to a habit of falsifying details to fit his narrative. Then came the digital breadcrumbs. Porter, it turned out, was an active participant in a private online chat group. Its name, Defenders of the Order. Its content, a cesspool of white supremacist ideology, conspiracy theories, and thinly veiled calls for violence against minorities. Porter wasn't just a bad cop, he was an ideologue using his badge to wage a private war. As Elise's investigation gained momentum, Carlos was mobilizing back in their community and reaching out to allies in Ohio. He organized teach-ins at community centers, partnering with local legal aid societies, focusing on Know Your Rights workshops and what he termed legal self-defense. He brought in retired lawyers, activists, even former police officers who had tried to blow the whistle on corruption, to educate people on how to navigate police encounters, how to document evidence, how to protect themselves within the bounds of the law. The system won't protect you unless you force it to, Carlos told a packed room in a Cleveland community center, his voice passionate. Knowledge isn't just power, it's armor. The mural Tarek was painting on a wall near the courthouse grew larger each day, a vibrant tapestry of defiance and hope. It depicted Marcus, not bruised and beaten but standing tall, a wrench in his hand. Beside him, a figure in a hoodie, face obscured but radiating strength, a single pen held aloft. Elise, watching the news reports, seeing the images of Tarek's art, of Carlos rallying crowds, felt a strange mixture of trepidation and grim satisfaction. The mask was coming off not just Porter's, but the systems that enabled him. The unmasking, however, was painful, revealing wounds that ran deeper than anyone wanted to admit. And it was far from over. The federal courtroom in Cincinnati was larger, more imposing than the county courthouse in Jefferson. But the air felt just as charged. This time, Elise Morgan wasn't an observer in a hoodie. She stood at the prosecution's table, the full weight of the Department of Justice behind her. Officer Daniel Porter, now stripped of his badge pending the outcome, sat at the defense table, his usual smirk replaced by a sullen glare. He was being prosecuted under a key provision of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, a federal statute aimed at holding law enforcement accountable for civil rights violations and excessive force. Porter's defense attorney, a slick, silver-haired man named Alastair Finch, known for his aggressive tactics and his ability to charm juries, opened with a sneer. "This isn't a prosecution, Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Finch declared, his voice dripping with contempt. This is a witch hunt fueled by social media hysteria and a politically motivated DOJ eager to make an example of a dedicated public servant. Elise remained impassive. She had anticipated this line of attack. Her case wasn't built on outrage, but on evidence meticulously gathered. She presented Porter's falsified reports, the pattern of complaints, the expert testimony on use of force protocols he had clearly violated. She introduced the content from the Defenders of the Order chat group, painting a picture of a man steeped in racial animus. The courtroom was packed. Marcus Cole and his family sat in the front row, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and anxiety. Judge Ida Lee had driven down from Detroit, a silent pillar of support in the gallery. Carlos was there too, having organized buses from Cleveland, ensuring the community presence was felt. One of the most damning pieces of evidence was body cam footage from another officer inadvertently captured from a different incident a year prior. Porter, believing he was off mic, was heard bragging to a colleague after a particularly violent arrest of a young Latino man. Another one off the streets, Porter had said, his voice laced with satisfaction. "Gotta keep these streets clean, you know? It's like taking out the trash." The slur he used to describe the young man was bleeped out in court, but its ugliness hung in the air. Tarek Johnson took the stand, his voice quiet but firm. He didn't speak of legal statutes or police protocols. He spoke of Marcus. He loved cars, Tarek said, his eyes on the jury. Could take an engine apart and put it back together before he was 15. Dreamed of opening his own garage. Now he flinches when he hears a siren. He has nightmares. He used to be so open, so full of laughter. That officer, he didn't just beat Marcus. He stole something from him. Something vital. The defense's strategy was to paint Marcus as a troubled teen, a threat, and Porter as a hero cop making split-second decisions in a dangerous job. Finch cross-examined Tarek brutally, trying to poke holes in his testimony to imply gang affiliations where there were none. But Tarek held his ground, his quiet dignity a stark contrast to Finch's bluster. The trial stretched for weeks. The emotional toll on Elise was immense. Each night, she'd return to her hotel room, the weight of her father's legacy, of Jean-Pierre's lost future, of Marcus's stolen innocence, pressing down on her. Carlos's nightly calls were her lifeline, his unwavering belief in her and the cause a balm to her frayed nerves. Then came an unexpected moment. During a recess, as Elise gathered her notes, a young woman approached her hesitantly. She was pale, with wide, anxious eyes. Elise recognized her as Emily Porter, Dan Porter's 17-year-old daughter, who had been sporadically attending the trial, her face a mask of conflicted emotions. "Ms. Morgan," Emily whispered, clutching a folded piece of paper. I just wanted to give you this." She thrust the note into Elise's hand and hurried away before Elise could respond. Later, alone, Elise unfolded the paper. The handwriting was youthful, looping. "I'm so sorry," it read. "What my dad did, it's wrong. I hear him at night, talking. He's not sorry. He's angry they caught him. Please make him stop. For everyone's sake. Make him stop being like this." The note was inadmissible, of course. But it was a crack in the wall of denial, a sliver of humanity from within the antagonist's own family. It reminded Elise that the fight wasn't just against individuals, but against the ideologies that consumed them, ideologies that poisoned families and communities. In her closing argument, Elise stood before the jury, the weight of history on her shoulders. She spoke of the Constitution, of civil rights, of the sacred trust vested in law enforcement. She laid out the evidence against Porter, piece by painstaking piece. But then, her voice softened, filled with a profound sorrow. "This trial," she said, her gaze sweeping across the faces in the courtroom, lingering for a moment on Marcus, "is not just about Officer Porter. It is about the system that created him, that shielded him, that emboldened him. A conviction here, while necessary, is not justice. It is merely a down payment, a receipt for a debt accrued over centuries, a debt of stolen lives, shattered dreams, and broken trust." The jury deliberated for 2 days. The tension was unbearable. When they finally returned, the foreman's voice was grave as he read the verdict, guilty. On all counts, a wave of emotion washed over the courtroom. Marcus's mother wept openly, clutching her son. Tarek closed his eyes, a single tear tracing a path down his cheek. Carlos squeezed Elise's shoulder. Porter sat stone-faced, his composure finally cracking as the reality of a federal prison sentence sank in. But as Elise watched him being led away, she felt no triumph, only a profound weariness and the undeniable truth of her own words. This wasn't justice. It was a reckoning, yes. But the real work, the work of rebuilding, of healing, of planting the seeds for a different future, had only just begun. The pen in her pocket felt heavy, a reminder of battles won and battles still to come. 1 year later, the snow fell softly on Detroit, blanketing the city in a deceptive calm. Elise Morgan watched it from the window of a newly renovated storefront, a warm mug of coffee cradled in her hands. The sign above the door, painted in bold, hopeful letters, read, "The David Morgan Justice Initiative." After Porter's conviction, the DOJ had wanted to promote her, to make her a poster child for their reform efforts. But Elise had heard her father's voice, her own conscience, Carlos's wisdom, and Judge Ida Lee's pragmatic truths. The system hadn't burned down. It had merely sacrificed a single, singed branch. She resigned amicably but firmly from the Department of Justice. The roots Carlos spoke of, she realized, couldn't be fully grasped from within those hallowed, compromised halls. True change, lasting change, had to grow from the ground up. Her legal clinic, funded by a patchwork of grants, private donations, and her own savings, offered pro bono services, ran Know Your Rights workshops, and advocated for systemic police reform at the local and state levels. It was a small operation, but it was hers, built on the legacy of her father's unwavering fight. Across town, a different kind of penance was underway. Daniel Porter, stripped of his pension, his appeals exhausted, his family fractured, Lena had filed for divorce, Emily choosing to live with her mother was shoveling snow outside a community center in a neglected neighborhood. Court-mandated community service. His face was grim, etched with a bitterness that seemed to have settled deep in his bones. The occasional passerby would recognize him, some with a muttered curse, others with a look of pity that perhaps stung even more. There was no audience here, no adoring colleagues, just the cold, the snow, and the slow, grinding consequence of his actions. Marcus Cole was thriving. He was apprenticing at an auto repair shop owned by Carlos's cousin, Miguel, a bustling, noisy place filled with the scent of oil and ambition. His hands, once cuffed and bruised, were now confidently dismantling and rebuilding engines. The flinch at sirens hadn't entirely disappeared, but it was less pronounced. Laughter came more easily to him now. He was even taking night classes, working towards his dream of owning his own garage. Tarek Johnson's mural on the wall of the David Morgan Justice Initiative's building was a masterpiece. It spanned the entire length, a vibrant, dynamic narrative of struggle and hope. There was Elise, not in a suit, but in the hoodie that had become her accidental emblem, her face determined, the silver pen clutched in her hand like a torch. Beside her, a depiction of Judge Ida Lee, her gavel held high, not as an instrument of punishment, but of fierce, protective justice. A broken police badge lay at their feet, new green shoots sprouting from the cracks. Marcus was there, wrench in hand, looking towards a brighter horizon. And woven throughout were the faces of the community, diverse and resilient. Art, Elise thought, as a living record, a testament. One blustery afternoon, as Elise was reviewing case files, a young girl, no older than 10, sat at a table in the clinic's small waiting area. She was with her mother, who was waiting for a consultation. The girl wasn't on a phone or tablet, she was sketching intently in a notebook. Curious, Elise walked over. The girl looked up, her eyes bright and intelligent. She was drawing a figure, a woman wearing a hoodie. But this hoodie was different. It was adorned with intricate patterns, stars, and what looked like tiny gavels. The figure was also wearing a pair of bright red Jordans. "That's a cool design," Elise said, smiling. The girl beamed. "Thanks. It's for when I become a prosecutor. I'm gonna be a prosecutor and wear Jordans. And a hoodie like yours, but my own kind." Elise's breath caught in her throat. In the girl's earnest declaration, in her unapologetic vision of justice intertwined with self-expression and community identity, Elise saw the future. She saw the seeds taking root. The pen her father had wielded, the hoodie she had worn, the mural Tarek had painted. They weren't just symbols of past battles. They were tools passed down, reinvented, ready for new hands. Looking at the determined young artist, then out at the falling snow, Elise finally understood her father's last words, words that had echoed in her mind for years. Justice wasn't a verdict handed down from on high, a singular moment of triumph or defeat. It wasn't a destination. It was the soil, tilled by struggle, watered by tears, enriched by sacrifice. The soil where new battles and new hopes grew. What a ride, right? Elise didn't just face the system, she flipped it. If that hit you, then you're exactly the kind of viewer we make these stories for. Smash that like, share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe because the next story might be even wilder. You don't want to miss it.